Greetings, cozy knights. Lower your swords and rest by the fire. Tonight, we journey through the dark truth about Alduin, the World Eater. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight and which games you'd like me to cover next. If you're enjoying these peaceful journeys, don't forget to subscribe so you catch every new video. But for now, let's get cozy and journey through the dark truth about Alduin together. In the beginning, before the world knew the shape of mountains or the weight of snow, there existed a being whose very name whispered destruction across the void. Alduin, the World Eater, the Firstborn, a creature of such ancient origin that even the oldest stones of Skyrim carry only faint memories of his first shadow. His scales black as the space between stars, his eyes burning with a fire older than mortal understanding. To speak of Alduin, it's to speak of endings, of cycles so vast that civilizations rise and crumble between their turning, and of a truth so dark that the living dare not contemplate it fully. For Alduin was never meant to be defeated. He was meant to devour the world, to consume everything until only silence remained, and then to sleep until time itself called him to begin again. The name Alduin carries weight in the dragon tongue, a language where words themselves shape reality. Break his name into its components and you find Alduin, which translates to Destroyer, Devour, Master. Each syllable rings with purpose, with an inevitability that chills the blood. Destroyer, because that is his nature. Devour, because that is his hunger. Master, because that is his birthright. The ancient Nords who first spoke this name did so with trembling voices, knowing that to name him was to acknowledge the end of all things. Yet they spoke it anyway, because Alduin demanded to be known, to be remembered, to be feared. Long before the Empire rose, before even the Merethic era began its slow count of years, Alduin existed in a form that defied mortal comprehension. Some texts suggest he predates even Nirn itself, that he was present at the very dawn of creation, watching as the world took shape from the chaos of the void. Nordic legends speak of him as the child of Akatosh, the dragon god of time. But even this familial connection raises questions that scholars have debated for centuries. Was Alduin truly born? Or did he simply emerge from the fracturing of something greater? Is he a son? Or is he an aspect, a splinter of divinity given terrible independence? The relationship between Alduin and time itself runs deeper than mere association. His nature as a being tied to Akatosh, the god of time, suggests he experiences existence differently than mortal creatures. When he was cast forward in time by the ancient Nord heroes, the nature of his banishment remains mysterious. Some scholars believe he simply ceased to exist in one moment and reappeared in another, experiencing no time between. Others suggest he may have drifted through the centuries aware but powerless to act. What seems certain is that this being, so intimately connected to time's passage, relates to its flow in ways mortals cannot fully comprehend. This fundamental difference in existence makes him something far more terrifying than a simple dragon, no matter how powerful. He is a being who operates outside the normal rules of mortality, of beginning and ending. The cosmic role assigned to Alduin speaks to an even darker truth. He is not merely a destructive force unleashed upon an unsuspecting world. He is the World Eater, a title that suggests purpose, divine mandate, inevitability. Nordic legends and Khajiit myths describe existence as operating in great cycles, with worlds ending and beginning anew. In these traditions, Alduin serves as the harbinger of these endings, the being who consumes one age to make way for the next. Whether this represents literal cosmic function or mythological interpretation remains debated among scholars, but the Nords believed it deeply enough to shape their entire understanding of Alduin around this concept. This perceived role, this understanding of him as an ending made manifest, casts everything about his actions in a different light. Understanding this casts everything about Alduin in a different light. When he ruled over ancient Skyrim, when he enslaved humanity beneath his shadow, when he devoured souls and demanded worship, was he acting out of malice? Or was he simply expressing his nature, a nature written into the fabric of existence by powers far beyond mortal understanding? The question troubles those who think deeply about such matters. Can a being be evil if it is only doing what it was created to do? Can the World Eater be blamed for eating the world? The ancient Nords did not concern themselves with such philosophical nuances. They knew Alduin as a tyrant, as a cruel god who demanded tribute and offered only suffering in return. Their legends speak of him descending from the sky like a black storm, his roar shaking mountains, his breath turning stone to ash. They built temples to honor him, not out of love, but out of terror. The dragon cult, that ancient and terrible organization, served as the intermediary between Alduin's wrath and mankind's desperate survival. Through the dragon priests, Alduin's will was made manifest, and the people learned what it meant to live beneath the shadow of an ending that walked on wings. Yet even in those dark ages, even when Alduin's power seemed absolute, there were those who recognized something amiss in his rule. Alduin called himself the Firstborn of Akatosh, claiming divine right to his dominion over mortals. But Paarthurnax, his own brother, would later suggest that Alduin had strayed from his proper path. By claiming lordship over the world, rather than simply ending it when the time came, Alduin had done something unprecedented. He had refused his cosmic duty. He had chosen to rule rather than to reset. This choice, this deviation from his intended purpose, would set in motion events that would echo through millennia. The truth about Alduin begins with this fundamental contradiction. He is a being designed to end the world, yet he chose instead to conquer it. He is meant to be an impersonal force of cosmic necessity, yet he demonstrated pride, ambition, cruelty, all the marks of a conscious, choosing entity. This makes him more than a simple villain. It makes him a tragedy, a being torn between what he was created to be and what he chose to become. Every act of tyranny, every soul devoured, every moment of his terrible reign speaks to this internal conflict. Alduin the World Eater, who should have no wants beyond his function, wanted to be worshipped, wanted to be obeyed, wanted to be a god rather than the hand of divine necessity. The darkness of his truth deepens when we consider what he became by the Fourth Era. When he returned from his temporal banishment, emerging from the time wound above the throat of the world, he was no longer the being who had been cast forward in time. Something had changed. Perhaps his long existence between moments had twisted him further. Perhaps the knowledge of his defeat had poisoned his purpose. Or perhaps he had finally embraced what he truly was, not a ruler, not even a god, but an ending given wings and fire and terrible intent. The Alduin who attacked Helgen, who resurrected his fallen brethren, who fled to Sovngarde to feast upon the souls of dead heroes. This was Alduin at his most desperate, his most dangerous, his most true. And therein lies the darkest truth of all. When the last Dragonborn finally confronted him in Sovngarde, when they struck him down with the help of ancient heroes, Alduin did not die the way other dragons did. His soul was not absorbed. It did not flow into the Dragonborn to strengthen them. Instead, it simply dispersed, faded, returned to something beyond mortal understanding. Because Alduin cannot truly die, he can only wait. The World Eater can be defeated, can be banished, can be forced into dormancy, but he cannot be killed, because to kill him would be to break the cycle itself, to doom the world to an existence without end, without renewal, without the terrible mercy of eventual completion. This is what many who witnessed Alduin's end came to believe, as they watched his essence dissolve into the ethereal winds of Sovngarde. The Dragonborn had not saved the world forever. They had only perhaps delayed something inevitable. Arngir and Paarthurnax both suggest that Alduin may return one day, though when or how remains unknown. The World Eater's fate after his defeat remains one of Skyrim's greatest mysteries, with some believing he is merely postponed, others hoping he is truly ended. Let us delve deeper into this darkness, into the truth that the ancient texts whisper and the living dare not speak aloud. Let us journey through the ages of Alduin's existence, from his birth at the dawn of time to his defeat in the Nordic afterlife, and discover what it truly means to stand against a being who was never meant to be stopped. The question of Alduin's origin winds through the theological debates of Tamriel, like a black thread stitching together contradictory histories. To understand what he is, we must first understand what he claims to be, and what others believe him to be, and how these understandings diverge in ways that reveal fundamental truths about the nature of divinity itself. Alduin proclaims himself the Firstborn of Akatosh, a title that carries immense weight within the cosmology of the Empire. Akatosh, the dragon god of time, chief deity of the nine divines, is widely considered to be the first of the Etada to form in the beginning place, the primordial realm from which all spirits emerged. If Alduin is truly Akatosh's firstborn, then he is the eldest of all dragons, the original child of time itself, with a claim to divinity that predates most of the pantheons mortals worship. Yet the relationship between Alduin and Akatosh is not as simple as father and son, at least not in any way mortals understand such connections. The nature of dragon creation remains one of the great mysteries of Tamrielic metaphysics. Dragons themselves refer to Akatosh as their father or maker, but whether this represents literal parentage or spiritual origin is unclear. When Alduin calls himself the Firstborn of Akatosh, he makes a claim about his position in the divine hierarchy. Paarthurnax, speaking from his perch atop the throat of the world, refers to Akatosh as his maker, as do other dragons. They describe being shaped by divine will, brought into existence through processes that transcend mortal understanding of creation. But here the theological waters grow murky. Imperial scholars often suggest that Alduin is simply the Nordic name for Akatosh, that the ancient Nords worshipped the same time God as the Empire, but called him by a different name, coloured by their own cultural interpretations. This view would make Alduin not the son of Akatosh, but another aspect of the same divine entity. The Nords themselves vehemently reject this interpretation. To them, Alduin and Akatosh are distinct beings, separate entities, with different natures and purposes. Akatosh is the god who blessed the Dragonborn with the power to oppose Alduin, which would make little sense if they were the same being. Why would a god create a hero specifically to defeat himself? The truth, as is often the case with Elder Scrolls metaphysics, likely exists in a space between these interpretations, a space where paradox and contradiction coexist comfortably. Certain visions and prophecies hint at deeper connections between dragons and the time god. The mythic dawn leader Vonos, in visions recorded during the Fourth Era, described both Alduin and the Dragonborn as fragments or shards of Akatosh's essence. If such visions hold truth, it would explain why Alduin cannot truly die, why his soul disperses rather than being absorbed, why his defeat feels temporary even in victory. He may not be a separate being that can be destroyed, but rather a piece of something eternal, and pieces of eternity can be scattered but never eliminated. This fragmentary nature reveals something deeply unsettling about Alduin's existence. If he truly is a splinter of Akatosh, then his terrible hunger, his desire to devour the world, is not an aberration. It is part of the nature of time itself. Time consumes all things. Every moment that passes is a moment that can never return, devoured by the inexorable flow of temporal progression. Alduin, in his role as World Eater, is simply time's hunger given form and consciousness. He is the inevitable end that awaits all things, the final tick of the cosmic clock, the moment when everything that has been accumulated through all the ages is consumed and reset. From this perspective, Alduin is not evil. He is necessary. He is the universe's way of preventing stagnation, of ensuring that no single Kalpa persists forever, growing corrupt and decayed beyond all possibility of renewal. Yet Alduin himself seemed to reject this cosmic function. Paarthurnax speaks of his brother's crime in terms that carry moral weight. He says that Alduin claimed the lordship of Akatosh, that he asserted dominion over the world that was not rightfully his. In the draconic understanding of existence, this is profound transgression. Alduin was meant to end the world when the Kalpa reached its natural conclusion. Instead, he chose to rule over it, to make himself not the executioner of time's sentence, but its emperor. This choice transformed him from a force of nature into a tyrant, from an inevitable ending into a conscious evil that could be opposed, should be opposed, must be opposed. The ancient Khajiit have their own understanding of this being. They call him Alkan, the Scale Prince, Firstborn of Akatosh, and describe him as born when the time god bred with a demon of fire and shadow. According to their myths, Alkan grew in size with each soul he consumed, forever hungering for the crown of his father. This interpretation paints Alduin as fundamentally ambitious, fundamentally hungry, fundamentally wrong in his very existence. He's not meant to rule. He's not meant to endure. He's meant to devour and be slain, to return cyclically like all aspects of time, but always to be opposed by those who value the current world over the promise of renewal. The Argonians know a similar figure, Atakota, whose role echoes Alduin's. The Yokudans speak of Satakal, the first worm, who eats itself repeatedly in an endless cycle of consumption and rebirth. Even the isolated Skarl of Solstheim acknowledge Thartag the World Devourer, who will appear at the end of seasons to consume all things. These cultural parallels suggest something fundamental about Alduin's nature. He is not unique to Nordic understanding. He is a universal force, recognized in different forms by different peoples, but always serving the same essential function. He is the ending, acknowledged and feared across all of Tamriel. Some texts hint at an even more disturbing possibility. They suggest that Alduin and Akatosh are not father and son, not aspect and whole, but rather brothers in a sense that transcends mortal genealogy. They are two sides of the same coin, two expressions of the same fundamental force. Akatosh represents time's creative aspect, its forward progression, its gift of change and growth. Alduin represents time's destructive aspect, its hunger, its inevitability, its promise that all things end. Neither can exist without the other. Creation requires destruction to make room for new creation. Destruction requires creation to have something to consume. They are locked in an eternal dance, and the universe they inhabit is simply the stage on which this dance plays out. This interpretation carries profound implications for what happened at the end of the main quest in Skyrim. If Alduin is Akatosh's shadow self, his destructive aspect made manifest, then his defeat in Sovngarde was not a victory over evil, but a suppression of a necessary force. By preventing Alduin from consuming the current Kalpa, the Dragonborn may have locked the world into a state of extended existence, prolonging an age that was meant to end. This would explain why Alduin's soul was not absorbed. It could not be destroyed because it is part of the fundamental architecture of reality. It could only be dispersed, sent back to whatever realm birthed it, to gather strength and wait for the next opportunity to fulfill its function. The ancient Nordic hero Feldir the Old, one of those who originally banished Alduin with the Elder Scroll, understood something of this darkness. In the vision the Dragonborn witnesses through the time wound, Feldir speaks with grim determination about what they must do. He knows they cannot kill Alduin. The Elder Scroll is not a weapon of destruction, but of banishment, a way to remove Alduin from the present moment and cast him into the distant future. This was never meant to be a permanent solution. It was a desperate measure, buying time for future generations, hoping that when Alduin returned, the world would be better prepared to face him. But can any world truly be prepared to face its own ending? Can any civilization, no matter how advanced, no matter how powerful, stand against the cosmic force that will eventually unmake all things? The Dwemer, in their arrogance, might have tried. They sought to transcend the very limitations of mortal existence, to become something beyond the reach of time and fate. They vanished from the world in a way that still puzzles scholars, leaving behind only their magnificent ruins and the mystery of their disappearance. Some whisper that their vanishing was itself a kind of victory, an escape from the Kalpa before Alduin could claim them. Others suggest their hubris doomed them to a fate worse than the natural ending they sought to avoid. The relationship between Alduin and Akatosh remains one of the great mysteries of Tamrielic theology. What is certain is that Alduin draws power from his connection to the time god, whatever the precise nature of that connection might be. His mastery over the Thu'um, the voice, stems from this divine lineage. The dragon language is not simply a means of communication. It is a language of creation and destruction, where speaking a word in the proper way can reshape reality itself. This is why Alduin's shouts carry such devastating power. When he speaks, he is not merely making sound. He is exercising authority that flows from the very foundations of existence. The most chilling aspect of Alduin's divine heritage is what it suggests about his eventual return. If the visions of his connection to Akatosh hold truth, if his essence is fundamentally tied to the time god, then his defeat in Sovngarde may never have been meant to be permanent. Paarthurnax suggests that Alduin's soul likely returned to Akatosh, though he admits uncertainty about such matters. He can be scattered, banished, temporarily unmade, but whether he can be truly killed remains one of the great unanswered questions. The Dragonborn's victory was undeniably real, saving the current age from destruction. Yet the manner of his defeat, with no soul to absorb, leaves many wondering if this victory will prove lasting. The darkness of this truth weighs heavily on those who understand it. Paarthurnax, speaking after Alduin's defeat, acknowledges both the necessity of what the Dragonborn accomplished and the sorrow of what it means. Alduin was his brother, the greatest of all dragons, Akatosh's most acclaimed creation. His fall is a tragedy even as it is a victory. The world continues because of what the Dragonborn did, but it continues with the knowledge that this reprieve is temporary, that somewhere in the vast expanse of eternity, Alduin waits, gathering his scattered essence, preparing for the day when he will return to fulfill his purpose. And when that day comes, there may be no Dragonborn to stand against him. There may be no ancient heroes waiting in Sovngarde to lend their strength. There may only be Alduin, the World Eater, the Firstborn, descending from the sky with hunger in his eyes, and the ending of all things carried on his wings. This is the dark truth that underlies everything else. Alduin is not a villain to be defeated and forgotten. He is an inevitability to be delayed, a force that will return again and again until finally, at the proper time, he is allowed to fulfill his cosmic mandate and devour the world in preparation for whatever comes next. The ancient bond between Alduin and his brother Paarthurnax represents one of the most tragic elements in all of Skyrim's lore. Theirs was not simply a political alliance between powerful dragons. It was a relationship forged in the earliest days of their existence, when the world was young and the sky belonged entirely to the Dova. Paarthurnax served as Alduin's chief lieutenant, his right hand, his most trusted companion in an age when dragons ruled as gods and mortals cowered beneath their shadows. The name Paarthurnax translates to ambition overlord cruelty, a title that speaks to what he once was before his great transformation. In those ancient times, he embodied these qualities fully. He was ambitious in service to his brother's vision, an overlord in his own right, and cruel in ways that history records only in the most fragmentary accounts. The histories speak vaguely of unspeakable atrocities committed by Paarthurnax during the height of Alduin's reign. What form did these atrocities take? The texts do not specify, perhaps because no words can adequately capture the horror of what transpired when dragons exercised their absolute dominion over mankind. Imagine villages burned not out of military necessity, but as displays of power, as reminders that defiance carried a price measured in ash and screams. Imagine tribute demands that left families starving, that took the strongest and best of each generation to labor in the service of beings who cared nothing for mortal suffering. Imagine the dragon priests, empowered by Paarthurnax and Alduin, enforcing laws so harsh that mercy became a forgotten concept, where even speaking a word of the dragon language without permission meant death. Paarthurnax is said to have been instrumental in teaching other dragons the deeper intricacies of the Thu'um during Alduin's reign, making them even more formidable than they already were. Under such instruction, dragons would have become masters of reality-altering shouts, turning their natural power into something approaching divine authority. This would have made dragon rule over mortals not just physical, but metaphysical. They would not simply have had the strength to dominate humanity, but the cosmic authority to reshape the very laws of nature according to their will. The world bent around dragons not only because they were stronger, though they were, but because dragons could speak the language of creation itself. The relationship between the two brothers seems to have been genuinely close during this period. When Alduin speaks of Paarthurnax in the present day, even thousands of years after the betrayal, his words carry not just anger, but a kind of wounded disappointment. At the throat of the world, when the Dragonborn and Paarthurnax face Alduin together, the World Eater's taunts are personal in a way that suggests deep familiarity. He mocks Paarthurnax's weakened state, reminds him of what they once were together, speaks to him as one might address a fallen brother whose choices have led him astray. There is history there, vast and complex, centuries of shared dominion over the world. What caused Paarthurnax to turn against his brother remains one of the great mysteries of the Dragon War. Different sources offer different explanations, and the truth may involve elements of all of them. Nordic legends claim that Kine, the goddess of the storm and mother of men, took pity on the suffering of mortals and called upon Paarthurnax to intervene. In this telling, it was divine command that spurred his rebellion, the intervention of a power even greater than the dragons themselves. Paarthurnax, speaking to the Dragonborn thousands of years later, offers a different explanation. He suggests that it was Alduin's false claim to godhood that turned him away, that his brother's arrogance in proclaiming himself equal to Akatosh was a transgression too great to overlook. But there is a third possibility, one that Paarthurnax himself hints at in his conversations with the Dragonborn. Perhaps what changed was not external circumstance, but internal recognition. Perhaps Paarthurnax began to question the nature of power itself, to wonder whether the domination that came so naturally to dragons was truly right, or simply easy. This would have been a profound transformation, a dragon looking at his own nature and choosing deliberately and painfully to resist it. Paarthurnax speaks often of the constant struggle against his draconic instincts, the daily battle to choose peace over domination, meditation over conquest. This struggle did not begin after the Dragon War. It began during it, when he first started to question whether might truly makes right. The decision to betray Alduin could not have come easily. Paarthurnax would have known what it meant, that he was not simply turning against the leader, but against his own brother, against the closest relationship he had in all the world. Dragons are fundamentally solitary creatures, proud and independent, but they acknowledge bonds of kinship, especially between Alduin and his most trusted. For Paarthurnax to break this bond was to break something fundamental in himself. It was to acknowledge that loyalty to his brother had led him to commit acts that could not be justified, could not be excused, could not be allowed to continue. When Paarthurnax chose to teach the Thu'um to mortals, he was not simply giving them a weapon. He was sharing the most sacred knowledge of dragonkind, the secret of their power, the linguistic key to reality itself. This was the ultimate betrayal from Alduin's perspective. Dragons had always held a voice as their exclusive domain. The few mortals who learned it, the dragon priests, did so as servants, using their limited understanding to enforce dragon rule, never to challenge it. What Paarthurnax did was give mortals the ability to speak as dragons spoke, to shape reality through word and will, to level the fundamental advantage that had made dragon domination possible. The creation of Dragonren represents the culmination of mortal mastery over the Thu'um. The three heroes, Feldir the Old, Hakon One-Eye, and Gormleth Goldenhilt, developed a shout specifically designed to defeat dragons. Whether Paarthurnax directly aided in crafting this particular shout, or whether it emerged from the mortal understanding he had taught them, remains unclear in the historical record. What is certain is that Dragonren forces its target to experience mortality, to comprehend the terrifying brevity of mortal existence, the fear of death that defines the human condition. For immortal beings like dragons, this experience is devastating. It grounds them literally and metaphorically, forcing them out of the sky, where they reign supreme, and bringing them down to earth, where mortals can fight them on more equal terms. The shout is elegant in its cruelty. It does not kill. It simply makes the unkillable understand what it means to die. The impact of this shout on Alduin specifically was profound. At the peak of the Dragon War, when Alduin descended upon the throat of the world, expecting to crush the rebellion, as he had crushed all opposition before, the three heroes struck him with Dragonrend. For the first time in his existence, the World Eater understood fear. He felt the weight of mortality pressing against his consciousness, even though he could not truly die in any conventional sense. This moment of vulnerability allowed the heroes to wound him, to bring him low enough that Feldir could use the Elder Scroll to cast him forward through time. Paarthurnax watched all of this unfold. He witnessed his brother's defeat, saw him torn from the present and hurled into an uncertain future, knew that his own choices had made this possible. The emotional weight of this moment cannot be overstated. He had not killed Alduin, could not kill him, but he had done something that in many ways was worse. He had humiliated him. He had revealed to the greatest of all dragons that even he could be brought low, that even the World Eater could be made to feel fear. After Alduin's banishment, Paarthurnax retreated to the peak of the throat of the world and began his long meditation. This was not simply a matter of finding a quiet place to contemplate philosophy. It was an act of penance, of self-imposed exile, of choosing to spend eternity struggling against his own nature, rather than allowing himself to return to what he had been. The Way of the Voice, as taught by Jurgen Windcaller and maintained by the Greybeards, became Paarthurnax's prison and his salvation. By choosing to use the Thu'um only for worship and meditation, never for conquest or violence, he fought against every instinct that defined him as a dragon. Thousands of years passed. Dynasties rose and fell. The ancient heroes who had fought beside Paarthurnax died and passed into legend. The dragon cult was destroyed, its members scattered or slain. Dragons became myths, stories told to children, creatures that no longer walked the earth in any meaningful numbers. And through it all, Paarthurnax remained at his post, waiting. He knew that Alduin would return. The Elder Scroll had not destroyed him, only delayed him. One day, the World Eater would emerge from the time wound, and when he did, there needed to be someone who remembered what had happened before, someone who could teach the new generation how to stand against him. When Alduin finally returned in the Fourth Era, Paarthurnax was there to witness it. The time wound above the throat of the world tore open, and his brother emerged, unchanged by the millennia that had passed, still burning with the same pride and ambition that had led to his downfall. The two brothers faced each other again after all those years, and Paarthurnax could not contain Alduin, could not stop him from descending to begin his reign of terror anew. This must have been a moment of profound pain for the old dragon. He had spent thousands of years preparing for this moment, transforming himself into something better than what he had been. And yet, when the test came, he was not strong enough to stop what was coming. The battle at the throat of the world, when the Dragonborn and Paarthurnax together faced Alduin for the first time, brings the tragedy of their relationship into sharp focus. Alduin's taunts cut deep because they are personal. He speaks of Paarthurnax's weakness, his betrayal, his failure to remain true to his draconic nature. But beneath the mockery lies something else. Hurt, confusion, a kind of grief for what their relationship once was and can never be again. Alduin does not understand why Paarthurnax chose mortals over his own brother. From his perspective, the betrayal makes no sense. Dragons are superior to mortals. This is simply fact, as obvious as the sky being above and the earth below. For Paarthurnax to side with the lesser beings against his own kin is incomprehensible. Paarthurnax, for his part, fights his brother with visible reluctance. He aids the Dragonborn because he must, because allowing Alduin to succeed would mean the end of the world. But there is no joy in this battle, no sense of righteous victory. He is fighting his own brother, the being who knew him longer than any other creature in existence, and every blow struck is also a blow to his own heart. This is not the clean heroism of fairy tales. This is tragedy in its purest form. Two beings who once stood together now forced into opposition by choices made long ago. After Alduin's final defeat in Sovngarde, Paarthurnax's grief becomes explicit. When the Dragonborn returns from the Nordic afterlife, victorious but exhausted, Paarthurnax acknowledges what has been accomplished, but he cannot celebrate it. He speaks of Alduin as his brother, mourns him as the greatest creation of Akatosh, recognizes that the world will never be the same with him gone. This is not the response of someone relieved that a villain has been defeated. This is the grief of someone who has lost family, even when that family's death was necessary, even when their actions left no other choice. The Blades, through their representative Delphine, demand that the Dragonborn kill Paarthurnax to answer for his ancient crimes. Their logic is cold and clear. He committed atrocities during his time as Alduin's lieutenant. Those crimes do not vanish simply because he later chose a different path. Justice demands that he pay for what he did. But this demand misses the complexity of what Paarthurnax represents. He is not simply a reformed villain seeking to escape punishment. He is a being actively choosing every single day to be better than his nature, fighting a battle against his own instincts that never ends, can never end, will continue until the day he finally dies. To kill him would be to eliminate one of the only examples in all of Tamriel's history of a creature fundamentally overcoming what it was created to be. The relationship between Alduin and Paarthurnax stands as testament to how even the strongest bonds can break when fundamental values diverge. They were brothers in the truest sense, shaped by the same forces, granted the same powers, starting from the same essential nature. But they made different choices. Alduin chose pride, domination, the assertion of his superiority over all other beings. Paarthurnax chose humility, meditation, the painful path of resisting his own instincts in service of something greater than himself. One path led to becoming a tyrant, the other led to becoming a teacher, and the space between these paths is measured not in distance, but in the uncountable sorrows of a broken bond that can never be repaired. The tale of the Dragon War speaks to the fundamental question of whether tyranny can ever be eternal, whether power alone can sustain dominion over those who suffer beneath it. For thousands of years, dragons ruled northern Tamriel with absolute authority. They were not simply powerful. They were divine in the eyes of their subjects, living gods whose will could not be questioned, whose demands could not be refused. The dragon cult served as the mechanism of this control, with dragon priests acting as intermediaries between the divine dragons and their mortal subjects. On the surface, this system appeared stable, unchanging, a hierarchy ordained by cosmic law itself. But beneath that surface, resentment grew like frost in stone, slowly splitting what appeared solid into fractured pieces ready to crumble. The transformation from benevolent rule in Atmora to brutal tyranny in Skyrim marks the point where the dragon's reign became unsustainable. In their original homeland, the relationship between dragons and men seems to have been more balanced. The dragon priests maintained order but also protected their people, served as fair arbiters, ensured that tribute demanded by the dragons did not break the backs of those who provided it. This was possible in Atmora partly because the land itself was harsh, enough that survival required cooperation between all its inhabitants, even between species as different as dragons and men. The common struggle against a hostile environment created bonds that might not have formed otherwise. When the dragon cult migrated to Tamriel and established itself in Skyrim, something changed. Perhaps it was the easier living in this new land that made the dragons grow complacent. Or perhaps it was Alduin's increasing arrogance as he claimed greater authority for himself. Whatever the cause, the dragon priest became crueler. Tribute demands increased to the point where villages struggled to survive. Laws grew harsher, enforced not to maintain order, but to demonstrate power. The distance between rulers and ruled widened from mere hierarchy into an unbridgeable chasm, where the suffering of mortals meant nothing to those who claimed dominion over them. The capital of this tyrannical rule was Bromjunar, located in what is now Hjalmarch, where the ruins of Labyrinthian still stand as testament to the scale and ambition of the dragon cult. From this seat of power, the dragon priests administered an empire built on fear and absolute obedience. The architecture of their temples reveals much about their mindset. These were not places designed for worship in any generous sense. They were monuments to dominance, structures meant to make mortals feel small and insignificant. The grand halls, the towering statues, the intricate traps protecting inner sanctums, all of it spoke to a culture that valued power above all else. For the common people living beneath this system, life became a grinding cycle of labor and fear. You worked the fields to provide food for yourself and tribute for your overlords. You obeyed every law, no matter how arbitrary, because disobedience meant death or worse. You watched as the dragon priests selected the strongest of your children to serve in their temples, knowing you would likely never see those children again. You bowed when dragons flew overhead, averted your eyes when they landed, spoke only when spoken to, and lived always with the knowledge that your life held value only to the extent that it served those who considered themselves gods. The breaking point came gradually, not in a single moment of revelation, but through accumulated suffering that finally became too heavy to bear. The rebellion began not with grand speeches or formal declarations, but with small acts of defiance. A village refusing to provide the demanded tribute. A priest found dead in the night, killed by unknown hands. Whispers of resistance passing from settlement to settlement like wind through grass. The dragons responded with overwhelming force, burning entire communities as examples, but this only fed the flames of revolution. Fear can sustain obedience only so long. Eventually, when the suffering of submission becomes greater than the fear of rebellion, people choose to fight even when victory seems impossible. The transformation of this scattered resistance into organized rebellion required outside help, and that help came from an unexpected source. Paarthurnax's decision to turn against his brother and teach mortals the Thu'um changed everything. Before this, the dragons had seemed truly invincible. They could fly beyond the reach of arrows. Their scales turned aside all but the most powerful weapons. Their voices could shatter stone and freeze blood. Fighting them seemed as futile as fighting the mountains or the sky. But once mortals learned to use the voice, once they could meet the dragons on the metaphysical battlefield of reality-shaping words, the impossible became merely difficult. 3 figures rose to lead this rebellion, 3 individuals whose names would echo through Nordic history for all time. Gormle Golden Hilt, a warrior of legendary skill and unshakable courage. Hakon One Eye, a tongue whose mastery of the voice rivaled even that of dragons. Feldir the Old, wise beyond measure and knowledgeable in the use of Elder Scrolls. Together, these 3 embodied different aspects of Nordic virtue: courage, skill, and wisdom. They became symbols around which the resistance could rally, proof that mortals could stand against gods and survive. The dragon war itself was brutal beyond measure. Dragons do not wage war with restraint. When challenged, they respond with total annihilation. Entire regions of Skyrim were scorched, left barren for generations. The death toll numbered in the tens of thousands at minimum, possibly far higher. Archaeological evidence suggests that the population of Skyrim during this period declined dramatically, not just from direct casualties, but from famine, disease, and displacement, as the conflict raged across the province. Some villages simply vanished, their locations forgotten, their people scattered to the wind or consumed by dragonfire. Yet the humans persisted. For every Nord who fell, others took up weapons and continued the fight. The Thu'um became the great equalizer. Tongues learned not just Dragonren but other shouts useful in combat. Frostbreath to counter the fire of dragons, Disarm to strip dragon priests of their enchanted weapons, Stormcall to hide troop movements in wind and rain. The dragons found themselves facing an enemy who could hurt them, who understood their language, who refused to bow no matter how many times they were beaten down. This was unprecedented in their experience. They had never faced organized, sustained resistance before, and they did not know how to respond to it except with escalating violence that only strengthened human resolve. Alduin himself led many of the dragons in battle during this period. Historical accounts describe him descending upon battlefields like a storm made flesh, his roar causing stone to crack and warriors' hearts to falter. He was not simply another dragon, larger and stronger than the rest. He was the World Eater, carrying with him an aura of inevitable doom that sapped the will of those who faced him. Many battles were lost, not because Alduin killed everyone who opposed him, but because his mere presence caused organized resistance to collapse into panic and flight. Fighting against him felt like fighting against death itself. The relationship between Alduin and his brother during the war adds another layer of tragedy to the conflict. Paarthurnax was helping humanity not from the shadows, but openly, training tongues, sharing knowledge, preparing them for the confrontation that had to come. Alduin knew of this betrayal, knew that his own brother was the architect of his opposition. The pain this caused him manifested as rage, as determination to crush the rebellion so completely that nothing remained to remember it. But underneath that rage was incomprehension. Why? Why would Paarthurnax choose mortals over dragons? Why would he side with creatures so brief and fragile against his own eternal kin? These questions likely haunted Alduin throughout the war, adding emotional torment to the physical challenge of facing enemies who could actually threaten him. The turning point came at the throat of the world. This location was chosen deliberately. It was the highest peak in all of Tamriel, a place of spiritual significance, the home of the Greybeards, even in that ancient age. More importantly, it was a place of power where the barriers between the material world and the divine realm grew thin. If Alduin was to be defeated, it would have to be there, where the Elder Scrolls magic could pierce through the normal limitations of reality. The three heroes lured Alduin to this confrontation through a combination of strategy and bravado, challenging him directly, implying that his failure to face them proved his fear. For a being like Alduin, such challenges could not be ignored. The battle that followed has been preserved in legend, though the details vary between tellings. What seems consistent is the ferocity of the combat, the way the mountain itself shook with the force of dragon shouts and the clash of titanic wills. Gormley demonstrated why she was called Golden Hilt, striking at Alduin with a combination of weapon skill and voice that forced even the World Eater to acknowledge her prowess. Hakon matched his Thum against Alduin's, a battle of words that shaped reality around them in impossible ways. And through it all, Feldir prepared the Elder Scroll, knowing that this artifact represented their only hope of success. The use of Dragonrend on Alduin was devastating in its effectiveness. The moment the shout struck him, the World Eater felt mortality for the first time in his existence. The weight of it, the fear of ending, the awareness of vulnerability, all of these crashed over him like a wave of ice water. For a being who had existed since the dawn of time, who had never known defeat, never experienced true danger, this psychological shock was as damaging as any physical wound. He crashed to the mountain, his invincibility shattered, and for a brief moment, the three heroes actually had the upper hand, but they could not kill him. Every attack they landed wounded him, drove him back, forced him to acknowledge them as threats. Yet his life persisted. Dragon souls are not easily destroyed, and Alduin's soul was tied to cosmic forces beyond mortal understanding. He would not die from their attacks, would eventually recover, would return to the battle again and again, until either he won or they exhausted themselves. Feldir understood this, knew that victory in the conventional sense was impossible. That's why he had brought the Elder Scroll. Gormley fell during the final phase of the battle. Alduin caught her in his jaws and threw her aside like a broken doll, her legend ending in a moment of brutal finality. Her death galvanized the remaining two heroes. Hakon kept Alduin occupied while Feldir prepared the scroll, speaking the words that would activate its power. When Alduin realized what was happening, he turned all his attention toward Feldir, breathing fire that should have reduced the old man to ash. But the Elder Scroll protected its reader, and the temporal magic woven into its pages proved stronger than even the World Eater's flames. The banishment itself was not violent. There was no explosion, no dramatic visual effect. Alduin simply ceased to be in that moment. The Elder Scroll pulled him from the present and cast him forward through time, not to any specific point, but into the general future, where he would eventually emerge again. From Alduin's perspective, this must have been profoundly disorienting. One moment he was in battle, fighting for his dominion, breathing fire at an old man who refused to die. The next moment, thousands of years had passed, and everything he knew was gone. The aftermath of Alduin's banishment marked the beginning of the end for the dragon cult. Without their divine lord to lead them, without the threat of his immediate return to enforce obedience, the remaining dragons scattered. Some fled to remote corners of the world, hoping to avoid the hunting parties that now scoured Skyrim seeking revenge for centuries of oppression. Others attempted to negotiate peace, offering their strength in service to the new order, hoping to find a place in the world that no longer feared them. Most were killed, their bodies left in dragon burial mounds that would dot the landscape for millennia to come. The dragon priests faced similar fates. Some barricaded themselves in their temples, using their considerable magical power to maintain fortifications against the rising tide of vengeance. These holdouts sometimes lasted for years, but eventually they all fell. The monastery at Forelhost in the Rift was one of the last bastions of the dragon cult, where the dragon priest Ragot led his followers in a mass suicide rather than face capture, when High King Harold's forces finally breached their defenses in 1E140. Others achieved a form of immortality through lichdom, binding their spirits to their corpses, waiting in sealed tombs for the day when Alduin would return and restore them to power. That day finally came in 4E201, more than 5,000 years after the Dragon War ended, when Alduin emerged from the time wound above the throat of the world. But that is a story for another section of this dark tale. For now, let us remember the Dragon War as it was. A desperate struggle by mortals who refused to accept their subjugation, who chose death with dignity over life beneath oppression, and who achieved something that should have been impossible. They did not kill a god, but they banished him, and in doing so, they proved that even the World Eater could be opposed, even if such opposition came at a cost measured in thousands of lives and the shattering of the world they knew. The centuries between Alduin's banishment and his return passed like a held breath, a period where the world could pretend, if it chose, that the threat was ended forever rather than merely postponed. The time wound above the throat of the world marked the site of his departure, like a scar on reality itself, a place where time behaved strangely, where past and present overlapped in ways that made even passing near it dangerous to mortal sanity. Paarthurnax took up his vigil at the summit, waiting for his brother's return with the patience of one who has lived through ages and expects to live through many more. The old dragon became part of Skyrim's landscape, a fixture as permanent as the mountains themselves, mostly forgotten by the world below. For the dragons who survived the war, these years were bitter. They had gone from rulers of the world to hunted outcasts in a single generation. The few who found refuge did so by making themselves useful to the new Nordic kingdoms, offering their strength and knowledge in exchange for protection from those who still carried grudges from the ancient conflict. But most dragons simply vanished from history during this period, either killed by vengeful humans or fleeing to places so remote that no one bothered to follow them. The populations of Skyrim grew up hearing dragons spoken of as ancient legends, creatures that once existed but do so no longer. The great burial mounds were seen as historical sites, monuments to a conflict that ended long ago. The dragon cult, once the dominant religious and political force across northern Tamriel, became a subject of persecution and eventually just of historical curiosity. Those members who survived the initial purges went underground, literally in many cases, hiding in the depths of Nordic barrows, where they maintained their rituals in secret. They never stopped believing that Alduin would return, that their faith would be rewarded, that the age of dragon rule would come again. But as decades became centuries and centuries became millennia, even the most faithful began to wonder. Their hidden temples became tombs. Their grand promises of future glory became faded dreams. By the Fourth Era, the dragon cult existed only in ruins, and in the Draugr who guarded those ruins, undead servants still maintaining their posts long after any living worshippers had died or abandoned the faith. In the larger world of Tamriel, Alduin's defeat became wrapped in the mythology of Nordic heroes. The specific details blurred with time. Different accounts gave different names to the heroes who fought him, different locations for the final battle, different methods for his defeat. The Elder Scrolls' role in the Banishment was forgotten by most, becoming just another lost piece of ancient history. The Blades organization, descendants of the ancient Akaviri Dragon Guard, maintained some of the true history in their archives, but even they lost track of crucial details over the centuries. By the time of the events of Skyrim, knowledge of what actually happened at the throat of the world existed in only the most fragmentary form. Alduin himself experienced this period not as passage of time, but as instantaneous transition. From his perspective, he was in battle one moment and emerging into a completely different world the next. This must have been profoundly disorienting even for a being as powerful as the World Eater. He had been cast out of his own era, removed from everything he knew, and placed into a world that had moved on without him. The dragon cult he had led was gone. His brother had transformed into something unrecognizable, meditating on peace rather than exercising dominion. The very landscape of Skyrim had changed, with new cities built on the ruins of places he remembered, different kingdoms arising from the ashes of the civilization he had ruled. Yet some things remained familiar. The throat of the world still stood as the highest point in Tamriel. The dragon burial mounds still contained the remains of his followers, and the fundamentals of Nordic culture, while evolved, still carried echoes of the age remembered. Courage, honor, strength, these values remained central, even if they were now directed toward different ends. Perhaps most importantly, the Thu'um still existed, still shaped reality through spoken words, still carried the power that had made dragons supreme in the first place. He could work with these remnants, build upon them, resurrect his army, and restore his dominion over the world. The Time Wound itself became Alduin's portal of return, a tear in reality that connected his ancient past to the distant future. Paarthurnax sensed the moment of his brother's emergence, felt the shift in the fabric of time that preceded Alduin's arrival. The old dragon knew what was coming, had been preparing for this moment across thousands of years, and yet, when it finally happened, he found himself unable to stop it. Alduin burst from the wound not, weakened by his journey through time, but seemingly energized by it, his power undiminished, his resolve hardened by the humiliation of his defeat. Their confrontation on the mountaintop was brief. Paarthurnax tried to reason with his brother, to convince him that the path he had chosen before was wrong, that there were better ways to exist in the world. But Alduin was beyond such appeals. He saw Paarthurnax as a traitor, as a dragon who had forgotten what it meant to be Dova, who had chosen weakness over strength and submission over domination. Their ideological divide was complete. Where once they had stood together, now they stood opposed, and no words could bridge that gap. Alduin descended from the mountain to begin his work of reclaiming the world he considered rightfully his. The attack on Helgen marked Alduin's first dramatic action upon his return, a statement of power and purpose that would echo across Skyrim. The small town had the misfortune of being conducting imperial executions at precisely the moment Alduin chose to announce his presence. Among those awaiting execution was Ulfric Stormcloak, the Jarl of Windhelm, and leader of a rebellion against imperial rule. Also awaiting death was an unknown prisoner, captured while crossing the border, whose presence there was almost accidental. Neither of these individuals should have been significant to Alduin's plans, yet fate, or perhaps something more deliberate, had placed them there at the crucial moment. Alduin's assault on Helgen was not merely destructive, but theatrical. He circled above the town, his massive wings blocking out the sun, his roars causing the very ground to shake. When he breathed fire, entire buildings exploded into flame, stone cracking from the sudden heat. People fled in all directions, the orderly imperial execution dissolving into chaos as soldiers and prisoners alike sought cover from the dragon's wrath. Some tried to fight back, launching arrows that bounced harmlessly off his scales, shouting orders that couldn't be heard over his roars and the screams of the dying. It was systematic destruction, Alduin methodically reducing Helgen to rubble, while demonstrating that mortal weapons and mortal courage meant nothing against his power. Yet this attack served another purpose beyond mere intimidation. By interrupting the execution of Ulfric Stormcloak, Alduin ensured the continuation of Skyrim's civil war, a conflict that would keep the province divided and weaken its ability to respond to his return. Whether he understood this strategic advantage or acted simply on instinct is unclear, but the result was the same. The Stormcloak rebellion continued, the Empire's hold on Skyrim remained contested, and the political unity that might have been mustered against the World Eater never materialized. More significantly, Alduin's attack inadvertently saved the life of the unknown prisoner, who turned out to be the last Dragonborn, the prophesied hero, destined to oppose him. This irony would not become apparent until later. but it represents one of those strange twists of fate that define the Elder Scrolls universe. The being meant to end the world saved the life of the only person capable of stopping him, purely by chance, in a moment of blind destruction. If the execution had proceeded just a few minutes earlier, if Alduin had chosen to attack any other settlement in Skyrim, the prophecy might never have been fulfilled, and the World Eater's return would have gone unopposed. After Helgen, Alduin began the systematic resurrection of his fallen brethren. He flew to dragon burial mounds across Skyrim, speaking words of power that restored flesh to ancient bones, life to spirits that had waited in death for thousands of years. This resurrection was not a spell in the conventional sense, but an exercise of Alduin's fundamental nature. As the Firstborn of Akatosh, as a being intimately connected to time itself, he had the power to undo death, at least for creatures like himself. The dragons who emerged from these mounds were not diminished by their long dormancy. They rose with all their power intact, ready to reclaim their place at the top of the world's hierarchy. The re-emergence of dragons sent shockwaves through Skyrim. Towns that had stood for centuries found themselves under assault from creatures no living person had ever seen. Guards trained to fight bandits and wild animals were suddenly facing enemies that could obliterate entire squads with a single shout. The civil war that had consumed everyone's attention suddenly seemed less important, as a more existential threat made itself known. Dragon attacks began occurring with increasing frequency, not just in remote areas, but near major holds, threatening trade routes, burning farms, killing people who had no weapons capable of fighting back against such power. Yet Alduin's resurrection of his followers was selective. He did not raise every dragon who had fallen during the Dragon War. Some remained in their burial mounds, undisturbed, perhaps because they had opposed him during his rule, or perhaps simply because he didn't trust them to remain loyal after so long. The dragons he chose were those who'd been most faithful during his reign, those who had enthusiastically enforced dragon dominance over mortals. This created an army unified in purpose, but limited in number, powerful but not overwhelming. It was still a force capable of dominating Skyrim, but it could be opposed if someone could unite the province against it. The resurrection of the Dragon Priest followed similar patterns. In ruins across Skyrim, ancient leeches stirred from their long dormancy, sensing their master's return. They emerged from their sarcophagi, donning their masks of power, commanding the Draugr servants who had guarded their resting places for millennia. These were beings of immense magical power, rivaling the greatest mages of the Fourth Era. They began preparing their temples to serve once again as centers of dragon worship, expecting that mortals would soon return to the old ways of submission and tribute. But the world had changed more than they realized. The people of modern Skyrim were not the same as the subjects they had ruled in the ancient past. These new Nords carried the legacy of those who had fought the Dragon War, inherited traditions of independence and self-determination that made them inherently resistant to renewed subjugation. As Alduin's power grew, so did resistance against him. The Blades, though reduced to a mere 2 members, recognized the significance of the dragon's return and began working to organize opposition. The Greybeards, pacifist though they were, understood that Alduin represented a threat to the entire world and took the unprecedented step of involving themselves in temporal affairs. Most significantly, the last Dragonborn emerged from obscurity, manifesting the power to slay dragons and absorb their souls, growing stronger with each victory in a way that had not been seen since ancient times. The pieces were moving into position for another confrontation between the World Eater and those who would oppose him. But Alduin had learned from his previous defeat. He would not be lured into another premature confrontation where his enemies could exploit his vulnerabilities. Instead, he followed a plan that had been hidden from mortal understanding until almost too late. He had access to Sovngarde, the Nordic afterlife, through a portal at Skyrim, one of his ancient temples. There, in the realm of the honored dead, he could feast upon the souls of Nord heroes, growing stronger with each soul consumed while simultaneously denying reinforcements to those who might oppose him. This strategy was dark brilliance itself. He would become more powerful while weakening the spiritual foundation of Nordic culture, consuming their greatest heroes, erasing the very concept of honorable death that motivated Nord warriors to fight fearlessly. The discovery of this plan came almost too late. By the time the last Dragonborn learned of Alduin's presence in Sovngarde and found a way to reach that realm, countless souls had already been devoured. The Nordic afterlife, which should have been a place of peace and celebration, had become a nightmare realm shrouded in mist, with Alduin circling above like a predator, swooping down to consume any soul that wandered too far from the protection of the Hall of Valor. The honored dead, warriors who had earned their place through lives of courage and valor, found themselves trapped in an afterlife that had become their prison, unable to rest, unable to feast in the halls of their ancestors, living in constant fear of the World Eater's hunger. This is where the dark truth of Alduin becomes most clear, in Sovngarde, consuming souls in the realm of the dead. But to understand the full horror of what he did there, we must delve deeper into the nature of that place and what it means to be truly devoured by the World Eater. The Nordic concept of Sovngarde represents more than simple afterlife. It is the fulfillment of everything their culture values, the promise that makes their way of life meaningful. A Nord who dies bravely in battle, who faces death with courage rather than fear, is guaranteed a place in this eternal hall where pain and suffering cease to exist. There, in the presence of Shor himself, the god who created both the mortal world and this realm of reward, fallen warriors feast and test their strength against each other in friendly contests, knowing that death cannot touch them again because they are already beyond its reach. Sovngarde is proof that courage matters, that honor is real, that the values Nordic culture holds highest are not empty words but divine truth. Alduin's presence in this realm perverted everything it represented. The mist he spread across the valley was not natural fog, but a manifestation of his power, obscuring vision, muffling sound, making it impossible for souls to find their way to the Hall of Valor. In this mist, heroes who should have been celebrating their well-earned rest instead wandered confused and frightened, unable to see more than a few feet ahead, always aware that somewhere in the grey murk above them, death circled on black wings. But this was not death as they had faced it in life. This was something worse. This was obliteration, the complete erasure of everything they had been, everything they hoped to be in eternity. The act of being devoured by Alduin in Sovngarde appears to have destroyed those souls completely, What exactly happens to a soul consumed by the World Eater remains one of the great mysteries, but the terrified accounts of those who witnessed it suggest total obliteration. The honored dead who fell to Alduin's hunger seemed to vanish so completely that it was as if they had never been at all. Their deeds in life remained, could not be undone, but their essence disappeared, apparently absorbed into the World Eater's own being in a way that offered no clear hope of restoration or return. This raises profound theological questions about what it means to die in an afterlife. Death in the mortal realm is a transition, a passage from physical existence to spiritual continuation. But what happens when death comes for you in the spiritual realm itself? When the afterlife you earn through valor becomes another stage where you can be lost? The implications are terrifying. If even Sovngarde offers no ultimate safety, if courage and honor cannot protect you, even in the realm specifically created to reward those virtues, then what meaning does anything have? The souls trapped in Alduin's mist understood this horror. When the last Dragonborn encountered them during the journey through Sovngarde, they spoke with despair that ran deeper than any fear of physical death. They described Alduin as the eater of souls, the stealer of memories, the ender of ends. They had fought bravely in life, faced death with the calm certainty that they had earned eternal reward, and now found that reward transformed into eternal torment. Some had been wandering the mist for days, others for weeks, all of them knowing that eventually the World Eater would descend upon them and they would cease to exist in any meaningful sense. Alduin's method of consuming souls was methodical. He did not simply blast through the mist consuming every spirit he encountered. Instead, he circled, patient as death itself, descending when he sensed a soul far from the protection of Shaw's Hall. The victim would hear his approach, the massive wing beats that sounded like thunder, the displacement of mist as his huge form moved through it. Then the roar, not a physical sound, but something that touched the very essence of what they were. And finally, consumption, an ending so complete that those who witnessed it could barely describe what they had seen. One moment, a fellow spirit stood beside them. The next moment, nothing. Not even a memory of who that person had been, because Alduin took even that when he fed. The deeper horror is what Alduin gained from this feeding. Each soul consumed added to his power in a fundamental way. These were not mortal souls, fragile and limited. These were the spirits of Nordic heroes, individuals who had achieved great things in life, whose deeds had earned them places in the most honored afterlife their culture recognized. Their strength, their courage, their very essence became part of Alduin when he consumed them. He was not just feeding his hunger, he was fueling his power for the confrontation he knew must eventually come. The strategic brilliance of this approach becomes clear when considered fully. By consuming souls in Sovngarde, Alduin could grow immensely powerful, while the Dragonborn worked to reach him. The World Eater had proven difficult to truly defeat in Mundus, the mortal realm. But in Sovngarde, in the realm of spirit, he might have been more vulnerable to a Dragonborn's power if confronted soon enough. By consuming the honored dead, he was both empowering himself and eliminating the very heroes who might have aided in his defeat. It was a plan that showed both intelligence and cruelty, a recognition of his vulnerabilities combined with ruthless determination to eliminate them before they could be exploited. Shaw himself was notably absent from his own hall, at least in any form visible to mortal perception. The god who created Sovngarde did not appear during this crisis. Tsun, his shield thane, guarded the bridge to the Hall of Valor, but could not venture into the mist to challenge Alduin directly. Whether Shaw was truly absent, unable to act, or simply operating according to rules mortals don't understand, remains unknown. This absence raises questions about divine limitations that have troubled Nordic theologians ever since. The three ancient heroes, Gormle Goldenhilt, Hakon One Eye, and Feldir the Old, had maintained their presence in Sovngarde for thousands of years, waiting for Alduin's return. They alone seemed immune to the mist's effects, able to navigate it without fear of becoming lost. This immunity may have stemmed from their previous victory over the World Eater, some form of spiritual protection earned through their sacrifice in life. When the last Dragonborn arrived, these three were ready to aid once more, to face the being they had defeated before, to prove that courage could triumph even against impossible odds. But they were honest about the challenge ahead. Alduin had grown immensely powerful from his feeding, and the coming battle would test everyone involved to the absolute limit. The confrontation in Sovngarde would be unlike any other battle in the history of Tamriel. Here, in the realm of spirit, normal rules did not apply. Physical weapons mattered less than will and conviction. Dragon souls could be harmed in ways they could not be in the mortal realm. But Alduin also had advantages here. Every soul he had consumed amplified his power. He was fighting in a realm he could access through his own personal fane, suggesting some claim of authority or connection to this place. Most crucially, he had nothing left to lose. If defeated here, truly defeated, he would face an end more final than the temporal banishment that had merely delayed him before. The mist itself became a weapon in Alduin's arsenal. He used it to obscure his movements, to separate his enemies, to create an environment where coordination became nearly impossible. The Dragonborn and the three ancient heroes would need to find a way to disperse this mist before they could effectively challenge the World Eater. Their solution came through the Thu'um, specifically through a shout called Clear Skies, which could push back the fog and create temporary zones of visibility. But the mist always reformed, always crept back, a constant reminder of Alduin's influence over this realm. The souls watching from the Hall of Valor observed this preparation with a mixture of hope and dread. Hope, because the last Dragonborn represented a prophecy fulfilled, a promise that the World Eater could be opposed. Dread, because they understood what failure would mean. If the Dragonborn fell, if Alduin consumed even this legendary hero's soul, then there would be no one left to oppose him. He would continue his feeding until every soul in Sovngarde had been devoured, and then he would turn his attention back to the mortal realm, empowered beyond measure, ready to fulfill his role as World Eater with nothing to stop him. The darkness of this truth settles over everything like Alduin's mist. Sovngarde, the ultimate reward for Nordic courage, had become a hunting ground for a predator who consumed the very souls meant to be protected there. Heroes who had earned eternal rest found, instead, eternal fear. The afterlife that should have vindicated all their sacrifices in life had become another trial, and this time, many would not survive it. Alduin's presence there was not just strategic advantage. It was cosmic violation. a being of endings bringing his nature to bear against a realm meant to celebrate those who had reached their proper end. And still he circled above, patient as time itself, waiting for the moment when the Dragonborn and the ancient heroes would emerge from the protection of the hall to challenge him in the open valley beyond, waiting to prove that even prophecy, even courage, even the accumulated heroism of ages meant nothing against his power, waiting to consume the last Dragonborn soul and remove the final obstacle to his dominion over all of Tamriel, both the living world and the realms of the dead. This is the dark truth of what Alduin did in Sovngarde. Not conquest, not subjugation, erasure. The complete elimination of souls who had already died, who had already earned their reward, who should have been beyond his reach. And in doing so, he revealed what the World Eater truly means. Not just the ending of physical reality, but the consumption of spiritual essence, the obliteration of identity and memory, the transformation of everything that was into mere sustenance for his insatiable hunger. The battle that would decide Skyrim's fate took place not in the mortal realm, but in the ethereal expanse of the Nordic afterlife, beneath auroras that dance like rivers of coloured light across an eternal sky. The last Dragonborn stood alongside three ancient heroes whose legends had sustained Nordic culture for thousands of years, facing a being whose very existence threatened not just the current age, but all ages to come. This was not merely combat. It was myth-making in its purest form, where every action would be recorded in the cosmic memory of Nirn itself, preserved for as long as the world endured. The preparation for this confrontation involved first dispersing the mist that Alduin had spread across Sovngarde. The Dragonborn, working with Gormley, Harkon, and Feldir, used clear skies repeatedly, pushing back the fog until the valley lay revealed in all its ethereal beauty. This was harder than it sounds. The mist resisted, fought back, required constant reinforcements of the shout to keep it at bay. But eventually, finally, the sky opened fully, and Alduin was revealed circling above, a massive shadow against the dancing lights. His response to this challenge was immediate and furious. The World Eater descended with a roar that shook the foundations of Sovngarde itself, a sound that carried not just volume but metaphysical weight. This was the voice of endings, of inevitable conclusion, of time itself demanding submission to its passage. Lesser souls would have fled from that sound alone, but the four warriors standing ready in the valley had all faced death already. They knew fear intimately and had chosen courage in spite of it. The roar washed over them without breaking their resolve. The battle began with Dragonrend, that ancient shout that had proved crucial in Alduin's original defeat. The four warriors spoke the words together, their voices harmonizing in a way that multiplied their power. The shout struck Alduin like a physical blow, forcing comprehension of mortality into a consciousness that had existed beyond such concerns. For a being intimately connected to time's endless flow, being made to understand finitude was agony. He crashed to the ground of Sovngarde, forced from the sky where he held every advantage, brought down to where mortal and immortal could meet on more equal terms. What followed was brutal and desperate. Alduin fought with everything he had, employing his unique storm call shout to rain meteors from the sky, breathing fire and frost in alternating waves, using his size and strength to scatter his opponents. Each time he regained his footing, each time he prepared to take wing again, Dragonren forced him back down. The ancient heroes coordinated their attacks with skill born from long practice fighting together centuries ago in the mortal realm, and now again in this place of spirits. Gormley struck with impossible speed, finding gaps in his scales that shouldn't exist. Haakon matched shouts with the World Eater, cancelling or deflecting his most devastating attacks. Veldir supported them both, his wisdom guiding strategy moment by moment. But the Dragonborn carried the heaviest burden. Only they possessed the power to permanently end Alduin's threat, to consume his soul if given the chance. The ancient heroes could wound the World Eater, could keep him occupied, could create openings for decisive strikes. But the killing blow, if such a thing was even possible, would have to come from the Dragonborn. That knowledge added tremendous pressure to every decision, every attack, every moment of the battle. Failure here meant more than death. It meant the end of everything. Alduin's power, amplified by the souls he had consumed, manifested in terrible ways. His shouts landed with force that could shatter stone. His physical attacks left wounds that burned with more than normal fire. He moved with speed unexpected from something so massive, anticipating attacks, countering them, creating an ever-shifting combat dynamic that prevented his opponents from settling into comfortable patterns. He was not just physically dangerous, but tactically brilliant, showing that his millennia of existence had taught him much about warfare. Yet he was fighting against prophecy itself. The last Dragonborn was not merely another warrior, but a fulfillment of ancient predictions, a being specifically crafted by fate to oppose the World Eater. Every time they landed a blow, every time they absorbed a measure of Alduin's power through their attacks, they were not just weakening him, but asserting their prophetic role. This created a kind of metaphysical momentum, where success bred further success, where each victory reinforced their claim to ultimate victory. The turning point came when Alduin, wounded and desperate, attempted to flee back to Skuldan, to return to the mortal realm where he might have more options. But Gormley anticipated this move, positioning herself to cut off his escape route, forcing him back into the combat circle. This moment of vulnerability was all the Dragonborn needed. A final Dragonren struck him at precisely the right instant, combined with simultaneous attacks from all four warriors, overwhelming even his immense capacity to resist. The World Eater fell, his massive body crashing to the ground of Sovngarde with force that sent tremors through the realm. What happened next was unlike any other dragon's death. When the Dragonborn killed other Dova, their souls were absorbed, drawn into the Dragonborn's own essence, adding their power and knowledge. But Alduin's soul did not behave this way. As his physical form began to disintegrate, his essence simply dispersed, breaking apart like smoke in wind, spreading across Sovngarde's sky in patterns that seemed almost intentional, as if even in defeat he was arranging his own return. The energy faded but did not disappear, did not flow into the Dragonborn, simply ceased to be visible while somehow remaining present in a way that defied easy description. This absence of absorption troubled everyone present. The ancient heroes exchanged glances of concern. The souls watching from the Hall of Valor murmured uneasily. Even the Dragonborn felt the wrongness of it, the sense that something crucial had been left incomplete. Paarthurnax, speaking later from his perch on the throat of the world, would explain that Alduin's soul likely returned to Akatosh, that beings of his cosmic significance cannot truly be destroyed, only defeated and sent back to whatever realm birthed them. But this explanation, while theologically sound, offered little comfort. The immediate reaction in Sovngarde was relief, bordering on euphoria. The mist that had covered the valley for so long dissipated completely, revealing the full beauty of the realm. Souls who had been trapped in fear could finally make their way to the Hall of Valor, to the reward they had been denied. The ancient heroes spoke words of praise and gratitude, acknowledging that what the Dragonborn had accomplished would be remembered as long as Nordic culture endured. Tsun himself granted passage back to the mortal realm, a blessing that carried with it recognition from the divine. But underneath this celebration lurked uncomfortable questions. If Alduin's soul was not absorbed, did that mean he could return? Not in the distant future as part of the next Kalpa, but sooner, gathering his dispersed essence and reforming in decades or centuries rather than ages. The inability to truly kill him suggested that his function as World Eater was more fundamental to reality than anyone had fully understood. He was not just a powerful dragon, but an essential component of the universe's architecture, as necessary in his way as time itself. Arngir, speaking on behalf of the Greybeards, offered perspective that was both hopeful and deeply troubling. He acknowledged the Dragonborn's achievement while also suggesting that Alduin may have been meant to return one day, that preventing the World Eater from fulfilling his cosmic function might have consequences no one could foresee. What if the Kalpa was meant to end? What if prolonging it unnaturally would lead to decay, to the world growing corrupt and stagnant, without the promise of renewal that Alduin's Devouring would provide? These were questions without easy answers, paradoxes that highlighted the complexity of what had occurred. Paarthurnax's response was more nuanced. Speaking from the depths of his own experience fighting against his nature, he recognized both the necessity of stopping Alduin and the tragedy of what that stopping meant. His brother had been wrong to rule rather than simply end the world when the time came. But was it right to stop him from ever fulfilling his proper function? The old dragon did not claim to know. He could only acknowledge the Dragonborn's courage while mourning the loss of his sibling, celebrating victory while recognizing its incompleteness. The deeper truth that emerged from these conversations pointed towards something scholars and theologians would debate for generations. Alduin was not evil in the sense that mortals usually understand evil. He was not acting from malice or seeking to cause suffering for its own sake. He was simply being what he was created to be, a being designed to end worlds who chose to rule one instead, and was punished for that choice by being defeated not once but twice. The tragedy was not that he was stopped, but that he needed to be stopped, that his very existence posed an impossible dilemma between allowing cosmic renewal and protecting the current age. From a certain perspective, every day that Skyrim continues to exist after Alduin's defeat is a day borrowed against what many believe to be inevitable. Nordic and Khajiiti traditions teach that ages must end to make way for new beginnings. Whether the defeat of Alduin truly prevents this cosmic cycle or merely delays it remains one of the great mysteries. By stopping him, the Dragonborn may have bought the world precious time, though at what ultimate cost, scholars cannot say. Yet the people of Skyrim, unable to concern themselves with cosmic philosophy, while struggling to survive in a war-torn province besieged by dragons, celebrated the Dragonborn's victory with genuine joy. They did not care about kalpas or metaphysical cycles. They cared that their children were no longer in danger from creatures that could incinerate entire villages. They cared that the world would continue at least a little longer. And perhaps, in the end, that is enough. Perhaps the purpose of heroes is not to solve eternal problems, but to buy time, to create space for normal life to continue, to defer the darkness for another generation. The Dragonborn themselves, returning from Sovngarde, found that the dragon threat had not completely ended, but had diminished significantly. Dragons still flew, still attacked occasionally, but without Alduin to resurrect and organize them, they became scattered problems rather than an existential threat. Some fled to remote corners of the world. Others sought to make peace with mortals, recognizing that the age of dragon dominion had truly passed. A few even approached Paarthurnax atop the throat of the world, seeking to learn the way of the voice, to find purpose beyond conquest. But the question of Alduin's return remained unanswered and unanswerable. His soul had dispersed, but not been destroyed. His essence had faded but not vanished. Somewhere in the vastness of Aetherius, or perhaps in some realm beyond even that, the World Eater's consciousness persisted, waiting. Perhaps he sleeps now, recovering from his defeat, gathering strength for another return. Perhaps he rages at his humiliation, plotting revenge against the Dragonborn who bested him. Or perhaps he has finally accepted his cosmic role, content to wait until the proper time comes for him to devour the world as originally intended. The dark truth of what happened in Sovngarde is this: nothing was truly resolved. Alduin was defeated but not destroyed. His threat was ended but not eliminated. The world was saved but not made safe. The Dragonborn accomplished what prophecy demanded, what courage enabled, what necessity required. Yet the victory feels hollow when examined closely, temporary in a way that other heroic triumphs are not. Unlike the defeat of Mehrunes Dagon in Oblivion, where the barrier between Mundus and Oblivion was permanently sealed, or the defeat of Dagoth Ur in Morrowind, where the heart of Lorkhan was destroyed, Alduin's defeat changed nothing fundamental about the universe. He still exists. He still serves his function. He's merely waiting for his next opportunity to fulfill it. And so, the world continues, one day at a time. Each sunrise a small victory against the darkness. Each sunset a reminder that all things end. The people of Skyrim rebuild their homes, tend their farms, raise their children, live their lives in the shadow of a threat postponed but never eliminated. They know, if they think about it, that one day the World Eater will return. But today is not that day. Today they can work and love and hope and dream. Today they can pretend that their world is permanent, that their lives have meaning that extends beyond the next Kalpa, that the sacrifices they make and the values they uphold will matter in some eternal sense. Perhaps that is all anyone can do in the face of inevitable endings. Live as if this moment matters, even knowing it cannot last. Fight as if victory is possible, even knowing the war is already lost. Hope as if hope itself creates meaning, even in a universe that will eventually consume all hope along with everything else. The Dragonborn's battle in Sovngarde bought time for these small dignities, these daily defiances against entropy. That may not be permanent salvation, but it is something. Perhaps it is enough. The final darkness of Alduin's truth reveals itself only to those willing to stare unflinchingly into the abyss of cosmic philosophy. What is the World Eater, really? Is he a villain for wanting to devour everything? Or is he a tragic figure prevented from fulfilling his only purpose? Was he evil when he ruled as a tyrant? Or was he simply confused about his role? Is it right to oppose him? Or is opposition itself a kind of cosmic hubris, mortals presuming to interfere with forces beyond their understanding? These questions have no easy answers because they challenge fundamental assumptions about good and evil, about right and wrong, about what it means to exist in a universe governed by cyclical time. Alduin represents one of the great paradoxes of the Elder Scrolls universe. He is both necessary and destructive, both evil and essential, both tyrant and servant of cosmic law. To defeat him is to save the world. To save the world is to prevent necessary renewal. The darkness is not in his power or his hunger, but in the impossible choice he presents. There is no right answer, only the answer we can live with, and the answer chosen was to oppose him, to fight for the continuation of the current age, to believe that this world, flawed as it is, deserves to persist a little longer. The dragons who survived Alduin's second defeat carry this knowledge with them. They understand what their lord represented, what his fall means, and what his eventual return will bring. Some of them, like Paarthurnax, have chosen to resist their nature, to find purpose beyond domination. Others wait in hidden places, biding their time, believing that Alduin will rise again, and the age of dragon rule will return. And perhaps they are right. Perhaps time favors them over mortals. Perhaps patience measured in centuries will eventually be rewarded when the World Eater emerges once more, stronger than before, ready to finish what he started. But until that day comes, if it ever does, Skyrim endures. Its people live and struggle and love beneath the watchful gaze of dragons who remember when the world was different. The Dragonborn, having fulfilled prophecy, passes into legend, their names spoken in the same breath as the ancient heroes who fought Alduin the first time. And high atop the throat of the world, Paarthurnax maintains his vigil, meditating on the nature of power and the possibility of change, knowing that his brother's soul has not been destroyed but only dispersed, aware that someday the choice between loyalty and justice may present itself again. This is the dark truth about Alduin. He cannot be truly killed because to kill him would be to break the cycle of creation and destruction that sustains reality itself. He can only be defeated, repeatedly if necessary, delayed, but never permanently stopped. Every victory against him is temporary. Every defeat he suffers is a prelude to eventual return. The World Eater is not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be managed, an inevitable ending that can be postponed through courage and sacrifice, but never completely prevented. And in acknowledging this truth, we find not despair, but a kind of austere hope. If even the World Eater can be opposed, if even inevitable endings can be delayed, then perhaps the struggle itself has meaning, regardless of ultimate outcome. The darkness is not that Alduin exists. The darkness is that he must exist, that without him the universe itself would cease to function properly. He is the price of existence, the cost of having a world at all. And knowing this, understanding it fully, we can still choose to oppose him, not because opposition will lead to final victory, but because opposition itself is meaningful. Because the time we buy with our defiance is time that can be filled with life and love and all the small, beautiful moments that make existence worthwhile. Alduin will return. This is as certain as the turning of seasons or the rising of the sun. But until he does, we have today. And today is worth fighting for. Thank you for journeying with me tonight, Cozy Nights. If this story helped you rest, consider leaving a like. It helps other weary travelers find their way to our fireside. And remember, there are many more tales waiting for you here by the fire. So don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next adventure. Until next time, sleep peacefully and have a cozy night.